The secret power of faith most people ignore. There is a hidden force operating in the lives of people who walk through impossible situations and somehow come out stronger, calmer, and unshaken. It's not luck, it's not intelligence, it's not even physical strength. It's something deeper, something ancient, something that most people talk about but very few truly understand. That force is faith. But not the shallow version of faith that repeats words without conviction, not the passive belief that something might work out someday. The kind of faith we're about to explore is active, dangerous, transformative. It's the kind of faith that moves a person from fear to authority, from doubt to clarity, from survival to dominion. Most people ignore this power not because they reject it, but because they misunderstand it. They think faith is waiting, when in reality faith is moving. They think faith is hoping, when in reality faith is knowing. They think faith is weak, when in truth it is one of the most aggressive spiritual forces that exists. The tragedy is that many people live their entire lives never accessing this power. They pray, but don't expect. They believe, but only halfway. They speak words, but inside they are filled with doubt. And because of this, they never see the full manifestation of what faith can actually do. What you are about to discover is not just another motivational message. This is a deep revelation about how faith truly operates beneath the surface of reality, how it shapes outcomes, alters circumstances, and even influences the unseen spiritual realm. If you grasp this, your perspective will change, your decisions will change, and ultimately, your life will change. Because once you understand the real power of faith, you can no longer live the same way again. You begin to see that fear loses its authority, that limitations begin to dissolve, and that what once seemed impossible starts to feel inevitable. And it all begins with one truth most people ignore: the invisible force that shapes reality without permission. What most people fail to realize is that faith is not just a religious concept, it is a governing principle of reality itself. Whether someone believes in it or not, faith is constantly at work, shaping outcomes, directing emotions, influencing decisions, and even altering the way events unfold. The problem is that most people are using faith unconsciously. They don't even realize that what they consistently believe, expect, and imagine is quietly forming the structure of their lives. This is why two people can face the exact same situation, yet experience completely different outcomes. One is paralyzed by fear, expecting failure, anticipating the worst. The other stands firm, expecting a breakthrough, holding on to an inner certainty that things will work out. And somehow, over time, reality seems to align with what each person believes deep inside. This is not coincidence. This is the law of faith in motion. Faith operates like a silent agreement between your inner world and the external world. Whatever you consistently accept as true within yourself begins to manifest around you. This is why negative thinking is so destructive. It is not just emotional, it is creative. It produces outcomes, and in the same way, true faith is not just comforting, it is powerful. It generates results. But here is where most people get it wrong. They think faith is about forcing themselves to believe something unrealistic. They try to convince themselves of things they don't truly accept. But real faith does not come from pretending. It comes from alignment. It comes from reaching a point where your thoughts, your emotions, and your inner convictions are all in agreement. When that happens, something shifts. There is a clarity, a stability, a quiet confidence that does not need external validation. You stop reacting to circumstances, and instead you begin to influence them. This is why faith is often described as something that can move mountains. Not because it physically lifts rocks from the ground, but because it changes the conditions that made the mountain seem immovable in the first place. It alters perception, strengthens persistence, sharpens focus, and opens doors that were previously invisible. People who operate in real faith are not naive. They see the same obstacles as everyone else. They feel the same pressures, the same uncertainties. But they refuse to let those things define what is possible. Instead, they anchor themselves in a deeper certainty, one that is not dependent on current circumstances. And this is where the true power begins. Because when your internal state is no longer controlled by your external environment, you become dangerous in the best possible way. You become unshakable. You are no longer easily discouraged, easily distracted, or easily defeated. You start to operate with a level of consistency that most people cannot maintain. And over time, that consistency produces results that seem almost supernatural to those who don't understand what's happening behind the scenes. But there is another layer to this that goes even deeper. Faith is not just influencing your behavior. It is interacting with the unseen dimension of reality. Whether you call it the spiritual realm, the subconscious mind, or something else, there is a level of existence that operates beyond what we can physically see. And faith acts as a bridge between these two worlds. What you believe internally sends signals into this unseen realm. And those signals begin to organize circumstances in ways you cannot always trace or explain. This is why opportunities sometimes appear out of nowhere, why solutions emerge at the exact moment they are needed, why doors open that logically should have remained closed. To someone without understanding, it looks like luck, but in reality, it is alignment. It is the result of a consistent internal state that has been shaping outcomes over time. And yet, most people ignore this. They focus only on what they can see, what they can measure, what they can control directly. They rely entirely on logic and forget that there are forces at work beyond logic. They try to solve everything externally, without ever addressing the internal patterns that are creating their reality in the first place. This is why they feel stuck, because no matter how much effort they put in, they are still operating from the same internal framework of doubt, fear, and limitation. And until that changes, the results will not change either. True faith requires a shift. It requires stepping out of reactive thinking and into intentional belief. It requires choosing what you accept as true, regardless of what is happening around you. And that is not easy, because the world constantly presents evidence that contradicts what you want to believe. It shows you failure, delay, rejection, uncertainty, and if you are not careful, you will absorb those things and let them redefine your expectations. But faith is the ability to resist that. It is the discipline of maintaining a different vision, even when everything around you suggests otherwise. It is not denial, it is direction. It is choosing where your focus goes and therefore where your energy goes. And over time, that focus begins to reshape your reality. This is why the secret power of faith is so often ignored, because it requires responsibility, it requires awareness, it requires consistency. It is much easier to blame circumstances, to accept limitations, to follow what is visible. But those who understand faith operate differently. They understand that what is unseen is just as real as what is seen. They understand that belief is not passive, it is active. And they understand that if they can master their inner world, they can begin to influence their outer world in ways most people never will. And once you begin to see this, once you begin to experience even a small part of this power, something changes inside you. You realize that you are not as limited as you thought. You realize that your future is not fixed. And most importantly, you realize that faith is not just something you have. It is something you use. The war between faith and doubt that controls your life without you. Noticing There is a battle happening inside you every single day, whether you are aware of it or not. It is not a physical battle, yet it determines physical outcomes. It is not visible, yet it influences everything you see. This battle is between faith and doubt, and most people lose it long before they even realize they are fighting. What makes this war so dangerous is not its intensity, but its subtlety. Doubt does not usually arrive as a loud, obvious voice declaring failure. It whispers, it suggests, it plants small seeds of uncertainty that grow over time. It says things like, "What if this doesn't work? What if you're not capable? What if you fail again?" And because these thoughts sound reasonable, logical, even protective, people accept them without resistance. But what they don't realize is that every time they entertain doubt, they are weakening their faith. And when faith weakens, action weakens, persistence weakens, clarity weakens, and eventually, results weaken. This is why many people start strong but do not finish. They begin with enthusiasm, with belief, with a sense of possibility. But over time, doubt begins to infiltrate their thinking. They start questioning themselves, they start hesitating, they start pulling back, and without even realizing it, they sabotage their own progress. The tragedy is that they often blame external factors. They blame timing, circumstances, other people. But the real shift happened internally, long before the external results changed. Faith was replaced by doubt, and everything else followed. What makes doubt so powerful is that it disguises itself as intelligence. It makes people feel like they are being realistic, cautious, or strategic. But in many cases, it is simply fear wearing a mask. It is the mind trying to protect itself from discomfort, from risk, from uncertainty. And while that may feel safe in the moment, it comes at a cost. Because growth, breakthrough, and transformation always require stepping into the unknown. They require acting without full certainty. They require trusting something that has not yet been proven. And that is exactly what doubt resists. Faith, on the other hand, operates differently. It does not wait for complete evidence. It does not require perfect conditions. It moves forward with incomplete information, guided by conviction rather than confirmation. And this is what makes it so powerful, because in many situations, the evidence you are waiting for will never appear until after you take action. Faith is what bridges that gap. It allows you to move before you feel ready, to act before you feel certain, to persist even when results are not immediately visible. But here is the key that most people miss. Faith is not the absence of doubt. It is the decision to move forward despite doubt. Doubt will always exist at some level. It is part of being human. The goal is not to eliminate it completely, but to prevent it from taking control, to recognize it when it appears, to question it, and to choose a different response. This requires awareness, because if you are not aware of your internal dialogue, you will automatically believe whatever thoughts arise. And many of those thoughts are not designed to help you grow. They are designed to keep you safe, comfortable, and predictable, which, in many cases, means staying exactly where you are. This is why developing strong faith is not just about belief. It is about discipline. It is about training your mind to focus on possibility rather than limitation. It is about choosing which thoughts you entertain and which ones you reject. It is about reinforcing the kind of thinking that supports your goals, even when it feels unnatural at first. Over time, this becomes easier, because the mind adapts to whatever patterns you repeat. If you consistently feed it doubt, it will produce more doubt. If you consistently feed it faith, it will begin to generate confidence, clarity, and direction. And this is where the real shift happens, because once faith becomes your default state, everything changes. You begin to approach challenges differently. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you start asking, "What can I do with this?" Instead of focusing on what might go wrong, you focus on what is possible. Instead of hesitating, you move. And those small shifts in thinking create massive shifts in outcome. But there is another layer to this battle that goes even deeper. Doubt does not just affect your thoughts, it affects your identity. The more you entertain doubt, the more you begin to see yourself as someone who is uncertain, incapable, or limited. And once that identity forms, it becomes self-reinforcing. You start acting in ways that confirm it. You avoid risks. You lower your expectations. You settle for less. And over time, that becomes your reality. Faith does the opposite. It strengthens identity. It builds a sense of capability, resilience, and purpose. It allows you to see yourself as someone who can handle challenges, who can adapt, who can overcome. And that identity drives behavior. You take more action, you persist longer, you recover faster from setbacks, and as a result, you create better outcomes. This is why the battle between faith and doubt is not just internal, it is foundational. It determines the direction of your life, and the most important part is that you have a choice in how you engage with it. You cannot control every thought that enters your mind, but you can control which ones you give power to. You can choose to reinforce faith, even when doubt is present. You can choose to act, even when you feel uncertain. And every time you do that, you strengthen the part of you that moves forward rather than holds back. This is not a one-time decision. It is a daily practice. A moment-by-moment awareness of where your focus is going. Because the truth is, your life will always follow your dominant belief. Not what you say you believe, not what you hope is true, but what you consistently accept as reality. And if that belief is rooted in doubt, your results will reflect that. But if it is rooted in faith, something powerful begins to happen. You start to see opportunities where others see obstacles. You start to take actions others avoid. You start to persist when others quit. And over time, those differences compound. They create a gap between those who operate in faith and those who operate in doubt, a gap that becomes more visible with each passing day, and eventually, what once seemed like a small internal difference becomes a completely different external life. That is the hidden war most people never fully understand, and that is why the power of faith is so often ignored. Not because it doesn't exist, but because mastering it requires confronting the very thoughts that most people would rather avoid. But for those who are willing to face that battle, to become aware of their internal patterns, and to intentionally choose faith over doubt, the results are undeniable. Because once you stop letting doubt lead and start letting faith guide your actions, you are no longer reacting to life. You are shaping it. Faith is not passive. It is a force that demands action. One of the greatest misconceptions that causes people to miss the true power of faith is the belief that faith is passive. Many think faith means waiting, hoping, or simply believing that something will happen without any movement on their part. But real faith has never been passive. Real faith is active, aggressive, and deeply connected to action. It is not something that sits still, it is something that moves, and this is where most people disconnect from its power. They say they have faith, but their actions reveal hesitation. They claim to believe, but they delay, overthink, and hold back. They speak about trust, but when the moment comes to act, fear takes over. And in that gap between belief and action, faith loses its strength, because faith without action is incomplete. It is like potential energy that is never released. It exists, but it does not produce results. This is why many people remain stuck even though they consider themselves believers. They have internal agreement but no external movement, and without movement, nothing changes. The truth is that faith expresses itself through action. It shows up in the decisions you make, the risks you take, the persistence you maintain. It is visible in how you respond to uncertainty, how you handle pressure, how you move when there is no guarantee of success. Faith is not proven in comfort, it is proven in movement despite discomfort. This is why the most powerful moments of growth often feel the most uncertain, because that is where faith is required the most. When everything is clear, when outcomes are guaranteed, when there is no risk, faith is not needed. But when you step into the unknown, when you move without full visibility, when you act without complete assurance, that is where faith becomes real. And that is where transformation begins. People often wait for a feeling before they act. They wait to feel confident, ready, or certain, but faith does not wait for those feelings. Faith creates them. It moves first, and the feelings follow. Confidence is built through action, not before it. Clarity is developed through movement, not before it. Strength is formed through resistance, not before it. This is why those who rely on feelings often remain stuck, while those who rely on faith continue to progress. They understand that action is not the result of faith, it is the expression of it. And the more they act, the stronger their faith becomes. Because every step forward reinforces the belief that movement is possible, that progress is real, that change can happen. But there is another layer to this that many people overlook. Action driven by faith is different from action driven by fear. Both can look similar on the surface, but internally they operate from completely different places. Fear-based action is reactive. It is rushed, anxious, and often inconsistent. It is driven by the need to escape discomfort rather than move toward purpose. Faith-based action, on the other hand, is intentional. It is steady, focused, and grounded. It is not rushed by panic, nor delayed by hesitation. It moves with direction, even when the path is not fully visible. And this difference is critical, because the quality of your action determines the quality of your results. When you act from fear, you often create more chaos, more confusion, more instability. But when you act from faith, even small steps begin to align in powerful ways. Opportunities connect, timing improves, momentum builds, and over time, what once felt uncertain begins to feel inevitable. This is why faith must be practiced, not just understood. It is not enough to agree with these ideas intellectually. They must be applied consistently in real situations. When you face a decision, you must choose whether to act from faith or from doubt. When you encounter resistance, you must decide whether to persist or retreat. When you feel uncertainty, you must determine whether to move forward or wait. And each of these moments strengthens one side of you while weakening the other. This is how faith grows, not through theory but through repeated action, through choosing movement when stillness feels safer, through choosing persistence when quitting feels easier, through choosing belief when doubt feels louder. And as you continue to make those choices, something begins to shift inside you. You become more decisive, more resilient, more focused. You stop overanalyzing every step and start trusting your ability to adapt along the way. You stop waiting for perfect conditions and start creating progress within imperfect ones. And this is where many people begin to see results that others cannot explain. Because from the outside, it looks like things are simply working out. But from the inside, it is the result of consistent faith-driven action. It is the accumulation of decisions made in alignment with belief rather than fear. It is the product of movement that continues even when results are not immediate. But here is something even deeper. Faith-driven action does not guarantee that everything will go perfectly. It does not eliminate challenges, setbacks, or unexpected outcomes. But it changes how you respond to them. Instead of seeing obstacles as signs to stop, you begin to see them as part of the process. Instead of interpreting delays as failure, you see them as preparation. Instead of being discouraged by resistance, you use it as a signal that growth is happening. And this perspective changes everything. Because when your interpretation of events changes, your behavior changes. And when your behavior changes, your results follow. This is why two people can experience the same setback and end up in completely different places. One sees it as proof that they should quit. The other sees it as feedback that they need to adjust. One retreats, the other adapts, and over time, those small differences create massive divergence in outcomes. Faith is what allows you to stay in the process long enough for results to appear. It keeps you moving when immediate rewards are not visible. It sustains your effort when motivation fades. It anchors you when emotions fluctuate. And in doing so, it gives you something that most people never develop: consistency. And consistency, over time, is one of the most powerful forces in existence. It compounds. It builds momentum. It creates progress that becomes increasingly difficult to stop. And all of it begins with a simple but powerful decision: to act. Not because you feel ready, but because you choose to move. Not because you are certain, but because you trust the process. Not because the path is clear, but because you believe it will become clearer as you go. This is the secret that most people ignore. They focus on belief as a mental state, while ignoring action as its necessary partner. But true faith is never isolated. It always expresses itself through movement. And once you understand this, once you begin to align your actions with your beliefs, something remarkable happens. You stop waiting for change, and you start creating it. You stop hoping for opportunities, and you start stepping into them. You stop being controlled by circumstances, and you begin to influence them. And in that shift, faith is no longer just an idea. It becomes a force that moves you forward, shapes your path, and transforms what once felt impossible into something real. Why most people pray, believe, and still see no results? There is a question that silently frustrates millions of people, even those who consider themselves deeply spiritual. Why do I pray? Why do I believe? And yet nothing seems to change. Why do I ask, trust, and hope, but still face the same problems, the same delays, the same unanswered situations? This question is rarely spoken out loud with full honesty, but it lives in the thoughts of many, and the reason it exists is because there is a missing understanding about how faith actually works in practice. Most people think that belief alone is enough, that saying the right words or having a moment of emotional conviction should be sufficient to produce results. But faith is not just about moments, it is about consistency. It's not just about what you say when you pray, it's about what you believe when you get up. And this is where the disconnect begins, because many people pray with faith but live with doubt. They speak words of belief, but internally carry fear, uncertainty, and contradiction throughout the rest of their day. And this contradiction cancels the power of their faith. It creates internal conflict. It sends mixed signals, and as a result, nothing fully aligns. Imagine trying to move forward while constantly pulling yourself backward. That is what inconsistent belief does. It neutralizes progress, it weakens direction, it keeps you in a state of almost, but never fully arriving. This is why some people feel like they are always close to a breakthrough, but never actually experience it, because their internal state is divided. One part of them believes, while another part doubts. One part expects, while another part fears disappointment. And in that tension, results become unstable or delayed. But there is something even deeper that must be understood. Faith is not just about asking for something, it is about becoming aligned with it. It's about reaching a state where your thoughts, emotions, and actions all reflect the reality you are expecting. And this is where most people fall short. They ask for peace, but live in anxiety. They ask for success, but act with hesitation. They ask for change, but remain in the same patterns. And because of this, their external reality has no reason to shift. Because internally, nothing has truly changed. This is not about blaming people. It is about revealing a principle. Reality responds to alignment, not just intention. It responds to consistency, not just desire. And when there is a gap between what you say you believe and how you actually live, that gap becomes the barrier to results. This is why some individuals, even with less knowledge or fewer resources, achieve breakthroughs faster than others. Because they are aligned, their belief is not divided, their actions match their expectations, their internal state is stable, and that stability creates momentum. It allows faith to operate without interference. But for most people, there is constant interference, negative thoughts that are never challenged, fear that is never confronted, habits that contradict their goals. And all of this creates resistance, not external resistance, but internal resistance. And that is the most powerful kind, because you can overcome external obstacles, but internal resistance will stop you before you even begin. This is why true faith requires awareness. It requires paying attention not just to what you say, but to what you consistently think and feel. It requires noticing when doubt enters your mind and choosing not to agree with it. It requires identifying patterns that contradict your desired outcome and actively changing them. This is not easy, because it demands honesty, it demands discipline, it demands taking responsibility for your internal world. And most people would rather focus on external factors than face what is happening within them. But this is where transformation happens, not outside, but inside first. There is also another reason why many people see no results, even when they believe they have faith. And that reason is timing. Faith does not always produce immediate visible outcomes. Sometimes there is a delay between the internal shift and the external manifestation. And in that delay, many people lose their consistency. They begin to doubt, they begin to question, they begin to withdraw their belief. And by doing so, they interrupt the very process that was already in motion. This is why patience is not separate from faith. It is part of it. It is the ability to maintain belief even when results are not yet visible. It is the strength to continue acting, thinking, and expecting as if the outcome is already forming, even when you cannot see it. And this is where most people fail, not because they lack faith initially, but because they do not sustain it long enough. They give up in the middle. They stop just before things begin to shift. They withdraw belief at the exact moment it is needed the most. And because of this, they never experience the full power of what faith can do. But there is something even more important to understand. Faith is not about controlling every outcome exactly as you imagine it. It is about trusting that the process is leading somewhere meaningful. Even if the path looks different than expected, sometimes the results of faith come in unexpected forms. Opportunities that were not planned, changes that were not anticipated, directions that were not originally considered. And if you are too attached to a specific outcome, you might miss what is actually unfolding for you. This is why flexibility is part of faith. It is the ability to remain open, to adjust, to recognize that the bigger picture may be beyond your current understanding. It is not about blind acceptance. It is about intelligent trust. Trusting that your consistent belief, aligned action, and disciplined thinking are moving you forward, even when the path is not perfectly clear. And when you reach this level of understanding, something shifts inside you. You stop measuring faith only by immediate results. You stop reacting emotionally to every delay. You stop questioning your path every time something does not happen instantly. Instead, you become steady, grounded, focused. You continue moving, not because you see results right away, but because you understand how the process works. And over time, that stability becomes your advantage. While others start and stop, you continue. While others doubt, you remain aligned. While others lose direction, you stay focused. And eventually, that difference becomes visible. Results begin to appear. Opportunities begin to align. Progress becomes undeniable, not because of luck, not because of chance, but because of consistency, because of alignment. Because of a faith that was not just spoken but lived. This is the secret most people ignore. They want results without alignment. They want change without consistency. They want outcomes without transformation. But real faith requires all of it. It requires becoming the kind of person who can sustain belief, maintain direction, and act in alignment over time. And once you reach that level, once your internal world is no longer divided, something powerful happens. You stop asking why nothing is changing, and you start seeing everything begin to move. The identity shift that unlocks the full power of faith. There is a final layer to faith that very few people ever reach, and yet it is the one that changes everything permanently. Most people operate faith at the level of desire. They want something, they hope for something, they try to believe in something, but they remain the same person internally, and because of that, their results are temporary, inconsistent, or non-existent. What they do not realize is that the true power of faith is not unlocked at the level of desire. It is unlocked at the level of identity, because as long as you see yourself as the same person, with the same limitations, the same fears, the same patterns, you will continue to produce the same outcomes, no matter how much you try to believe differently. This is why many people experience short bursts of motivation or belief, but eventually fall back into old habits, because their identity has not changed, and identity is the foundation of behavior. It is the lens through which you interpret reality. It is the internal definition of who you are, and everything you do is filtered through that definition. If you see yourself as someone who struggles, you will unconsciously create struggle. If you see yourself as someone who fails, you will hesitate, doubt, and eventually confirm that belief. If you see yourself as someone limited, you will avoid opportunities that require expansion. This is not intentional, it is automatic, because identity operates below conscious thought. It shapes your decisions before you even realize it. And this is why faith at the level of words is not enough, because if your identity contradicts your belief, your identity will always win. You can say you believe in success, but if you see yourself as someone who is not capable, your actions will reflect that deeper belief. You will hesitate at critical moments. You will second-guess your decisions. You will pull back when you should move forward. And over time, those small actions will reinforce your identity, creating a cycle that is difficult to break. But when identity shifts, everything changes. Because now your actions align naturally with your belief. You no longer have to force yourself to act differently. It becomes your default behavior. You begin to think differently, respond differently, move differently, and that creates a completely different trajectory for your life. This is where faith becomes effortless, not because there are no challenges, but because your internal state is no longer divided. You are not trying to believe, you are operating from belief. You are not trying to act, you are expressing who you have become. And this is the level where transformation becomes permanent. But how does this shift happen? It does not happen overnight. It happens through repetition, through consistency, through reinforcement. Every time you choose faith over doubt, you are not just changing a thought, you are reshaping your identity. Every time you act despite fear, you are proving to yourself that you are capable. Every time you persist through difficulty, you are building evidence that supports a new version of yourself. And over time, that evidence accumulates. It becomes undeniable. It replaces old beliefs with new ones. It rewrites the internal story you tell yourself, and eventually you reach a point where you no longer question your ability to move forward. You no longer see yourself as limited. You no longer operate from fear, because your identity has evolved. And once that happens, faith is no longer something you try to activate. It is something you live from. But there is another important aspect of this shift. Identity is not just about how you see yourself, it is also about what you accept as normal, what you tolerate, what you expect. If you are used to struggle, You will tolerate it. If you are used to inconsistency, you will accept it. If you are used to limitation, you will expect it. And these expectations shape your reality. They determine what you allow, what you pursue, what you reject. This is why changing identity also requires raising your standards. It requires deciding that certain patterns are no longer acceptable, that certain thoughts are no longer allowed, that certain behaviors no longer align with who you are becoming. And this is not about perfection, it is about direction. It is about consistently moving toward a higher version of yourself, even if progress is not always linear, because every step in that direction reinforces the identity you are building. But here is where many people hesitate, because changing identity feels uncomfortable. It feels unfamiliar. It challenges old patterns, old beliefs, old environments. And sometimes it even creates distance between you and people who are not growing in the same direction. And this can be difficult, because humans are naturally drawn to familiarity, even if that familiarity is limiting. But growth requires leaving that behind. It requires stepping into a version of yourself that may not feel natural at first. And this is where faith becomes essential again, because you must believe in the person you are becoming before you fully experience it. You must act as that person before it feels completely real. You must make decisions based on that identity before you see the full results. And this is what separates those who transform from those who remain the same. The willingness to step into a new identity before there is complete external confirmation. The willingness to trust the process of becoming, even when it feels uncertain. And over time, that trust is rewarded, because identity is not static, it is dynamic. It evolves based on what you consistently reinforce. And if you continue to reinforce strength, resilience, clarity, and belief, those traits become your foundation. They become automatic. They become who you are. And once that happens, everything else begins to align. Opportunities match your identity. Decisions become clearer. Actions become more consistent. Results become more predictable. Not because life becomes easy, but because you have become stronger, more focused, more aligned. This is the ultimate secret of faith that most people ignore. They try to change their outcomes without changing themselves. They try to believe differently without becoming different. But real transformation requires both. It requires internal evolution that supports external change. And once that alignment is established, once your identity, belief, and action are all moving in the same direction, something powerful happens. Progress accelerates. Resistance decreases, clarity increases, and what once felt impossible begins to feel natural, because you are no longer operating as the person who struggled to believe, you are operating as the person who embodies belief. And from that place, faith is no longer a concept. It is your reality. It is your foundation. It is the force that drives everything you do. And once you reach that level, there is no going back, because you have seen what is possible. You have experienced what alignment feels like, and you understand that the true power of faith was never outside of you. It was always within, waiting to be activated, strengthened, and ultimately lived.